Hi, and welcome to this presentation about A-level geography. I've written there's a contemporary course that will investigate issues from today that will affect you, that will affect the students' lives. It's a very modern, up-to-date course which will build on what you've learned from GCSEs. It's been a very popular course in the past. We've had very high uptake and really good student retention as well. And I suppose that's testament to the engaging and dynamic nature of the subject matter that we cover. I always ask students if you've got older siblings or friends who have gone and studied A-level geography at school, ask them, see what they said about it, and if they said they enjoyed it, it was good, then I suppose the proof's in the pudding with their own experience. So on this first slide, what I have here, we follow the Pearson Edexcel course, and it's divided into two main sections really. On the left there, paper 1 physical paper and paper 2 the human paper, and each has a 2-hour 15-minute exam, which is about 30% of the qualification. There's a paper 3 which we don't discreetly study for. We do work throughout the whole year building up to it, but it's a synoptic investigation where what happens is the students are given a booklet of data and information within the exam. You read it and then you have some questions based on that, and that draws on your understanding from all aspects of the course. And what we mean by synoptic, it's where we link lots of ideas together. Paper 4 is not really a paper, it's not an exam at all. It's called the NEA, the non-examined assessment, or the independent investigation. That's 20% of the qualification, and essentially it is a piece of coursework where students produce a project, and it's independent. So they produce a project based on an area, a topic of study which we've previously covered, and they find really interesting, and it's a chance for them to really delve into something and produce a project which is really actually of an undergraduate standard, and the projects that we've created in the past have been really quite impressive. So that's the overall structure. I'm sure that you will have a handout, and there will be a handout that you can get as well which has a lot more information on that. But let's actually look at exactly what we will be covering within the physical paper and the human paper. So over the next two slides, what I'm going to do is just talk you through the actual subject content matter that we are going to be looking at. So this slide is about the physical side of the course. You'll have two teachers. One will be a physical specialist and teach you the physical side, preparing you for paper 1, and the other teacher will teach you the human side of the human geography, and the human specialist who will prepare you for paper 2. So paper 1 is a physical paper, and we start with, in year 12, tectonic processes and hazards and coastal landscapes and change. And then in year 13, it's carbon cycle, energy security, and the water cycle and water insecurity. So tectonic hazards, processes and hazards, you've already started doing some of this in GCSE, but we build on your knowledge of those particular hazards, and we look at some additional hazards. So for example, tsunamis and volcanoes in a lot more detail than you've previously done at GCSE. The two largest events in recent history have been the 2004 Asian tsunami, which we will look at in depth, where 250,000 people were killed. It was 9 on the Richter scale, and the picture you're looking at there is the Japanese tsunami, which was also 9 on the Richter scale, happened in 2011, but only 18,000 people were killed. So quite a disparity between the amount of people affected with those two events. So we delve into actually why that is, and it's easy to say, oh, well, it's the level of development which we taught you at GCSE, but it's a far more complex picture, looking at the mechanics of the earth and where these events are actually occurring, and then looking at the background of the actual events themselves. It is based around looking at certain events and comparing and contrasting them, so we are looking at a lot of footage of real life events. Then we move on to coastal landscapes and change, and you studied this part of your GCSE, coastal landscapes, and you've got a good understanding of the physical mechanisms that shape our landscape. But we look more globally, and we build on your knowledge and look at some of the hazards that are occurring on the coast, such as, for example, sea level rise. And sea level rise, we often think of it affecting the planet sort of equally, but I've got 3 pictures there. One picture of the Thames Barrier in London, which is this one, which has got these rather futuristic looking silver domes. We've got the Maldives, which is the top picture, which is this bridge coming across from the top of it, and we've got Bangladesh. Now all areas here are very low lying, and they're all going to be affected by sea level change, but they're going to be affected very differently. So for example, London, we've got this Thames Barrier, this multi-million-pound project that has basically essentially stops floodwater coming up the Thames. Then we've got Bangladesh and Maldives, and I'm sure that you're aware that those are both lower income countries and are going to be affected by sea level rises. But which one is going to be affected worse? So we look into actually why or affected more severely. So we look into that in a little bit more detail. You can see here in Bangladesh, you've got a line of people who are literally handing sandbags to each other because that's their only line of defense against rising sea levels and a storm surge. Whereas the Maldives here, very interestingly, doesn't have a huge income from tourism. That would be its main one, and some from fishing. But it's 2,000 low-lying islands. Yet they are able to cope with it far more effectively. In fact, they're actually advancing their land mass by land reclamation. And how are they doing it? They're doing it with a bit of Chinese investment. Now, why are the Chinese investing in just the Maldives? You might be thinking, well, it's about the tourism industry. Yes, it is, but it links far more in depth with other things that are happening around the world, which I'll talk about in the next slide. Then we look at carbon cycle and energy security. So obviously for any nation, having a secure source of energy is absolutely fundamental, and we look at the source of this, that being carbon, as that is our main source of energy at the moment, that being coal, oil, gas. We also sort of explore then why we have this dependency on that and the problems that that has caused in the past, and the problems that is continuing to cause, even up until last year, when there was tension within the Middle East and there were drones and torpedoes being fired at Iranian and US ships as a result of essentially them blockading what we call a choke point. And then, of course, we try to ease out of our dependence on on carbon-based fuels and look at what the alternatives are, and is electric cars actually viable? Then the ever-changing present water cycle and water insecurity. Again, we look at the countries which have water security and those that do not, and what we can do to try and make countries more secure, as it is a fundamental need for everybody. So that is your physical geography, just in a nutshell. I'm sure your teachers can talk to you more about it in class, as they will, and give you a much more in-depth sort of discussion about what these are actually about. So this slide here will outline the topics that we're going to cover on the human side of the course. Globalization and regenerating places, which is in year 12, and superpowers and health and human rights, which is in year 13. So globalization is about that process which is inevitable and is occurring across the whole planet, the way that people, commodities, capitals, so that's people, goods, money, and information, ideas, are flowing around the world with increasing pace, with huge implications for people and the environment. We look at what's caused it, the government decisions that have caused it, the international organisations that accelerate it, and of course TNCs being often called the architects of globalisation. And then ultimately we're looking at the impacts of that. So we build on some of your understanding from GCSE, but it takes a whole new direction, looking at how we might benefit from globalisation, and the fact that we can go to Primark and or Peacocks or H&M or Gap or any one of these clothing stores and get very cheap clothing which we might wear a few times and then it may well be discarded. And the picture that you're looking at there is Rana Plaza. Rana Plaza is in Bangladesh, and it is a factory which manufactured fabric and clothing for shops like Primark, and it collapsed, causing 1,000 deaths. And it collapsed purely because it had too many people in it. It was old, and the vibration of the machines caused it to collapse. So obviously there's a huge amount of negative impacts of globalization, with us traveling around the world more, obviously not in the current crisis, but overall we are traveling around the world more, which is causing a global culture to emerge, greater amounts of democracy, but also greater consumerism and the environmental implications of that. So we look at the implications for the environment, we look at the implications for people. You don't often think about your mobile phone, for example, about what is actually in your mobile phone. That machine, that piece of technology essentially costs £10. Of course there's all the R&D that goes into it, but it's £10 because of the plastic, the aluminium, the rare earth metals that go into it. But where's it been made? It's been made in China, where some people have moved from rural areas into urban areas just to get a job there, because they're that desperate to raise their standard of living. And they may well have a job where they literally put one screw into an iPhone, all day for 12 hours a day, and that is their job. And as a result, some of these factories have very high suicide rates. The conditions in other factories, there's one other where it's been dubbed the dismemberment capital of the world, because there's over 2,500 dismemberments. That's where you lose a finger or a hand in the machines because of the poor working conditions. We then look at regenerating places, which is very much about those places which are successful places, which I'm sure you'd like to visit in your life, like, for example, London, Paris, New York, Sydney, LA, Rio de Janeiro, Mexico City, all these places which are really successful, and the challenges that they face, and then other places which are less successful, and what the implications are for the people there and the environment there, and what we can essentially do about it. Superpowers is another unit that will start in year 13, which really underpins our understanding of all of the other units, and it really draws them together because it helps us to make sense of the current geopolitical landscape and sort of 21st century current affairs. And for most students, it's the one which really helps them to make sense of the world today. So it studies the superpowers, the main power being the USA, and then the emerging powers and the threat to potential stability of the planet, or likewise more stability, depending on what the outcomes are. So we look at how the superpowers try to manipulate and influence the other countries. And so we've got various pictures here, for example, of them having advanced technology and trying to create super soldiers. You think Captain America is something of Marvel Comics, but actually it's something which was actually invented a long time ago in the USA to create a superior army. All of those Marvel comics are based on some element of reality. This picture here is actually of a Russian aircraft carrier which sailed down past the UK as a show of symbolism, and then the UK actually had to sort of respond, and so they flank it here, and this is a UK Navy ship which is flanking it and escorting it down through the Straits of Dover. Now, why did they do that? They wanted to do that to show the UK that they are an able military. They're not such an able military, as you can see from their ship. It's got black smoke billowing out of the top there, and it actually has to be flanked by 2 tugboats because it breaks down so frequently. So they have 1 aircraft carrier. I wonder how many the USA does. Make a little bet with yourself. How many do you think the USA has got? Russia's got 1. The UK has got 1 very impressive one, when they're building another one. We've got various others which have been sort of discontinued and sold on. China has got 1 which they bought from Russia, and the USA has got 11. But China is also there trying to exercise its power as an emerging power, and you've got a picture here of how it's trying to increase its land mass, or increase its influence in what we call the Spratly Islands, by something called land reclamation. So this isn't basically a bunch of rocks in the South China Sea, and it is trying to create new air bases and new military bases, and it's doing something through land reclamation. Now, I wonder if you can cast your mind back to the physical units and think about, okay, well, why was the Maldives so coping with sea level rise? Well, it's because China are helping them. Why is China helping them? Because the Maldives is on the way to Africa, and what does Africa have in it? It's got lots of rare earth minerals which are used to make things like mobile phones. So it's all part of a much bigger picture. And the final unit is health and human rights, which we go on and we look at the human health across the planet and the human rights and how these vary. So we've got pictures here, and we don't just look at things that have happened in the past, such as the Rwanda genocide, which is this rather grim picture of the bones of the people who were murdered because they were of a different ethnic origin. We look at the past events, and we look at events which are happening today. So these are what we call Uyghurs, Chinese Uyghurs. They live in the western part of China, the part which is not overly developed. If you look on a world map, it's the part closer to Europe. So, and these people are Muslim, and they have been rounded up by the Chinese currently and put into re-education camps and been shown how to operate their lives in a more Chinese way. Some have dubbed them to be concentration camps, and the re-education is about trying to get them, ethnic cleansing is trying to get them to stop believing in Islam as their sort of main faith and religion. So we look at some past events in the in sort of 1990s and some of the other. It's not just about those things either. It's also about some of the wars that have occurred, such as the Iraq War, the Afghanistan War, the fight against Al Qaeda and ISIS, and the emergence of lone wolf attacks and how difficult those are to deal with. And obviously looking at the more more up to date health and human rights issues that are around the world. So it's a very up-to-date contemporary course which looks at issues from today. So I'm sorry that you're not given the opportunities to ask questions through this slideshow. If you did have any, then please do email me or call or speak to any one of your teachers, and you can get more information about the course. There is also information on the website and on the Edexcel webpage as well, but it's always nice, I'm sure, to actually speak to somebody, especially if you've got any sort of questions about those exams or any of the administration side of it. But please do not worry about that. And don't get bogged down with that, because really the course, the 2-year course, what I say to people is actually, if you're interested in people, places, and you want to make a difference, you'll find this course really engaging. The staff love teaching it and are passionate about teaching it, and we're lucky to have very skilled members of staff who really work hard to make the lessons as engaging and as up to date as possible, and really enjoy it themselves, which comes through. And the final note I'll say is, like I said at the beginning, is actually trust just your peers. I'm going to say that it's amazing, and I really do think geography is amazing, but trust your peers. Go and speak to somebody who's in year 12 or year 13 or any siblings who have done the course, and ask them and see what they say. And I'll leave it there.